All gods will die.
You're not the only one cursed with knowledge.
Welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy. Thor: Love and Thunder added a lot of new things to the MCU. New characters, new locations, new lore, and added another iconic MCU Big Bad played by an Oscar-winning actor to the already impressive list of MCU Big Bads played by Oscar winners and nominees. In my opinion, Gorr is right up there with the best of any villain in the MCU or any other Marvel movie. He's vicious, but has understandable motivations. I would have liked to have seen him butcher just a few more gods, but I guess I have the comics for that. But this also got us thinking. Gorr is, in many ways, the exact opposite of the biggest big bad in the MCU, Thanos. In fact, I think each of these villains is proof that there are really two types of Marvel villains in the MCU. And this yin-yang relationship between Thanos and Gorr is something that I think is going to affect their children in Phase 5 and beyond.
Get your kids, Marty. Something has got to be done about your kids.
I'm going to talk more about the similarities and differences between Gorr and Thanos in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about how the two of them create these two basic categories that every villain can fall into. Now, usually when we categorize comic book villains, they fit into two categories.
There's the soldier villain who fights the hero with his hands. And then there's the real threat who fights the hero with his mind.
But it's a little different in the MCU. Sure, we have our thinkers and our monster types, but the two kinds of villains in the MCU boil down to why they are villains. Mainly, are they doing villainous things for themselves or for others? Basically, we have our Thanoses and our Gorrs. The Thanoses want to gain power for themselves or for their masters. The Gorrs are acting out of concern for others, but the Thanoses are acting out of concern for themselves.
But didn't Thanos want to save the universe from starvation?
Well, he says that was the reason, but he also built a massive cult around himself and tormented his children for years. But more on that in a bit. First, let me talk about these two types of villains. So the Gorrs. Their hearts are in the right place, but their methods are unsound. Here's a brief list, and I'm not going to list everybody because there's a lot of movies and shows in the MCU, but you get the point. Thunderbolt Ross, Icarus, Caecilius, Eleanor Bishop, Harrow, and Malekith.
Malekith? Didn't he want to turn off all the lights in the universe?
Yes, but he was doing this for his people. Everyone I just listed was under the belief they were acting completely on behalf of others. Then there are the Thanoses. They just want to bring glory to themselves. Norman Osborn, Obadiah Stane, the Clandestines, Justin Hammer, Agatha, Ronan, Ego, Whiplash, and Ghost. You'll notice there's a lot more of those villains because the MCU has not had that many great villains over the years. So I guess what this all really boils down to is a different perspective on justice. Some people want justice for themselves. Others want justice for an entire marginalized group. For instance, Loki wants justice for himself because he was slighted at royal court.
I remember a shadow, living in the shade of your greatness.
Whereas the Vulture is looking out for the other guys in the lower economic class.
Guys like us, you and me, they don't care about us.
All of these villains are doing what they think is right, but some of them just have radically different worldviews. Now let's look at how Gorr and Thanos are exact opposites. And by the way, we have a ScreenCrush merch store now at shopzeroedition.com. We have lots of stuff branded with our logo, retro tees, and my personal favorite, this original trilogy t-shirt. Visit the link down in the description to get your hands on some of this tasty, tasty merch.
Shut up and take my money!
Now back to the villains. First, since Marvel's all about endgames,
That's the endgame. We're in the endgame now.
let's look at the goals each villain ultimately wished to achieve. Thanos famously wanted to balance the universe by indiscriminately eliminating half of all life, thus ensuring enough resources for everyone. By randomly separating who lives and who dies, Thanos tried to justify mass genocide by claiming it was indiscriminate and fair.
Random, dispassionate, fair to rich and poor alike.
But by randomizing who died, it meant that trillions and trillions of total innocents were killed. Innocents like Mantis, Betty Brant, Hawkeye's kids, and even Groot. Not to mention half of all dogs. And everyone knows there's no such thing as a bad dog.
Go get it, boy! You can do it! Go that boy!
There are other villains who believe that the end always justifies the means, and that the random loss of life is just a necessary stepping stone to order, like Red Skull or Kingpin.
I've hurt people, and I'm going to hurt more. It's impossible to avoid for what I'm trying to do.
On the other hand, Gorr's plan was to balance the universe by very specifically killing the gods of the universe, numbering in only the thousands or maybe even the hundreds. In his mind, the gods are selfish, cruel, and hypocritical, far from innocent. And it was a calculated strike, doing the most good with the least damage, righting the universe with a scalpel as opposed to a machete like Thanos' plan. Now this is more in line with Magneto's plan to turn world leaders into mutants in the movie X-Men, or how Alexander Pierce wanted to target specific troublemakers with Zola's algorithm. But funny enough, one of the only things Thanos and Gorr have in common is what initially set them on their opposite courses: starvation. Gorr's hatred for the gods began after he was forced to watch his young daughter starve to death while the gods he prayed to intervene selfishly feasted on delicacies not even too far away. You can see an obvious parallel here with Eric Killmonger. He was raised in poverty and wanted to make sure no black kid from the projects ever had to suffer again. Or how the Flag Smashers fought for open borders and a universal end to poverty. Meanwhile, Thanos proposed killing half the population of his home planet Titan before everyone starved to death. His own people thought that was crazy and banished him, and the planet ended up falling just like he predicted. Once he saw that he was right, which we made a video about, he made it his mission to save the whole universe. There are similarities here to another maximalist thinker, Ultron, who saw a simple way to solve all the world's problems at once, by ending all life.
Yeah, that works.
But Thanos' failure haunted him for the rest of his life. It's the reason that he believes that only he could fix the universe's problems. Reminds me a lot of Wanda Maximoff, who demanded that she was the only Wanda in all the universe who was fit to raise her boys. But the end goal of ending starvation is where the similarities between Gorr and Thanos end. Gorr and Thanos even reacted to their traumas in very different ways. Gorr blamed the gods for failing to answer his prayers, but Thanos didn't blame the people for ignoring him. He just doubled down on his beliefs. Gorr disavowed his beliefs, not just no longer relying on the gods, but actively seeking them out and butchering them. Now, Thanos claims he's acting on behalf of the universe, but his quest is really a monument to his own self-importance. Thanos' dream of wiping out half the cosmos is grandiose, just like he is, a mad titan who loves to make pompous, self-important speeches. Likewise, the way he goes about executing his plan is elaborate and epic, so much so that it took 2 3-hour movies. Thanos literally uses every aspect of existence to snap away half of all life: space, time, power, soul, mind, and reality. He combined these 6 elements of the universe into one almighty infinity gauntlet. Conversely, Gorr is a minimalist, using only what he needs, starting with a simple, modest-looking sword. Now at first, his methods are uncomplicated. He goes around stabbing gods to death, but even when he expands his scheme, wishing all the gods to go away, he does so by seeking out eternity and simply asking for it. Other than stealing Stormbreaker to reach eternity, his plan is very straightforward. Even the visuals that go along with these plans deeply contrast one another. The Infinity Gauntlet is bright and colorful, shiny and gold like Thanos' armor, powered by 6 sparkling multicolored gems. Gorr's Necro Sword is black obsidian, literally devoid of color. The Shadow Realm, where Gorr makes his base of operations, sucks the color out of everything around and even within it. It's a minimalist dream. This theme of minimalism versus maximalism is everywhere in the methods Gorr and Thanos use. After being exiled from Titan, Thanos quickly surrounded himself with his allies, becoming a kingpin in the intergalactic criminal underworld and eventually a cosmic warlord. His army grew as he conquered worlds, executing half their population and recruiting their best warriors. By the time of Infinity War, he was in control of the Chitauri, Sakarans, and the Outriders. Even Ronan the Accuser bent the knee up shortly until before his death. Thanos also had a powerful inner circle: his daughters Gamora and Nebula, and the Black Order, Ebony Maw, Cull Obsidian, Proxima Midnight, and Corvus Glaive. His fleet included massive warships like the Sanctuary II and party ships like the Leviathans.
I don't see how that's a party.
Even the Nova Corps were no match for his forces. Everyone in the galaxy feared the name Thanos. Who? Eventually. And this is what really separates the Thanoses from the Gorrs: the desire to be worshipped by others.
Hail Hydra.
Hey, Hydra!
Your savior is here! Mysterio will be the greatest hero on Earth. Yes!
This isn't a tomb. It's a throne.
Whereas the Gorrs work solo.
I don't have people. I'm alone.
Solo.
Gorr's only help comes from the shadow monsters, and they seem to be mindless creatures, unlike the allies of Thanos, and are much smaller in number than any one of Thanos' many armies. Gorr uses them more as a distraction than as an attack force, whisking the children of New Asgard away while the adults battle his shadow monsters. Zemo could have used the dormant super soldiers for himself, but instead, he acted alone.
Did you really think I wanted more of you?
And He Who Remains could have built a cult to worship him, but instead, he created the Timekeepers. Now, this lone wolf mentality is a core part of Gorr's characterization, just like Thanos' need to surround himself with his subordinates is part of his characterization. Thanos' MCU debut is in the mid-credits scene for the Avengers, where he's sitting on a throne after Loki failed to conquer Earth in his name. Gorr, meanwhile, is introduced wandering the desert with nothing to his name and no one with him but his dying daughter. So let's talk about Gorr's daughter, because she is also a great illustration of how Gorr is the anti-Thanos. Her death is Gorr's entire motivation for butchering the gods, so much so that the only way Thor can stop him is by changing his mind to use his one wish to bring her back. Gorr is dying, and when he makes that wish, and he could have asked for anything, to kill all the gods as he planned or to save his own life. Instead, he sacrifices himself and uses his one wish to resurrect his daughter. Thanos does the exact opposite. He sacrifices his daughter for his own end goals, the Soul Stone. Based on just the handful of scenes that we've seen of Gorr, I can't imagine any scenario where he would throw his little girl off a cliff. His love for his daughter goes so far that he even entrusted his enemy, Thor, to raise her in his absence. As long as she was taken care of, Gorr was content. And again, there are numerous MCU villains who are driven by strong connections to the people they love, like Killmonger's love for his dad, or Caecilius and Zemo's love for their families. Whereas, in the beginning, Loki only loved himself.
But wasn't Wanda driven by love for her children?
Well, that's what she told herself, but her kids would have been fine living with their variant mom in another timeline. She wanted the boys for herself. See, she's more like Thanos. He ripped Gamora and Nebula away from their families right before executing those families in cold blood. And let's not even get into the whole dismembering Nebula to make her stronger thing. How could Thanos be so cruel to his own children? Well, that gets right to the core personalities of Gorr and Thanos, which, not coincidentally, drives their minimalist versus maximalist approaches. Thanos is a textbook narcissist.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
Now, we all have that friend who watches their own Instagram stories, but Thanos watches himself die and is still smug about it.
I am inevitable.
His plan to snap half the universe away may, in his mind, be a selfless act. But he is so convinced his plan is the only way that nobody could ever talk him out of such an insane genocidal act. At least not in this reality.
I'm a big enough man to admit when I'm wrong.
See, 616 Thanos not only thinks he's worthy to wield all 6 Infinity Stones, but that he is destined to wield them. That he deserves to. That he is, in essence, a god. Or at the very least, that he deserves to be a god. Now, Gorr, of course, has no such illusions. He despises gods. He does not want to be one. He wants to kill them, all of them. Narcissism is Thanos' defining trait. Only someone who puts themselves first so absolutely could sacrifice their own child to gain power. Which brings us back to the daughters of these two polar opposite villains. And this is where I think the MCU can use these two villains, who are mirrors of each other, to set up a major confrontation in the MCU. While both Thanos and Gorr are now dead and gone, their children are very much alive, and like their fathers, seem to be mirror images of one another. Like we said before, Gamora was kidnapped at a young age, while Gorr willingly left his daughter Love in the care of Thor. From then on, Gamora was a villain, an agent of Thanos. It wasn't until the events of Guardians of the Galaxy that she finally gave in to her instincts and became good again. And Gamora would have been one of the Gorr-type villains, who believed she was acting in the service of others before she did a face turn and left her dad's militia. Well, at least that's what happened to the Gamora that we first met, who was killed by Thanos in Infinity War. The Gamora that currently resides in the MCU had her change of heart when Nebula was able to convince her that in the original timeline she not only became good, but she helped her sister see the light too. After Avengers Endgame, this alternate Gamora, who is never a Guardian of the Galaxy, goes off on her own, and we haven't heard from her since. So, what's she up to?
Yeah, what's she up to?
Well, remember, she was, up until very recently, in her timeline, a bad guy, and still has a lot of red in her ledger that she'll want to atone for. Without the love and support of the Guardians, she may be struggling to stay on the right track, and the next time we meet her, she could be good, or she could be bad, or she could be somewhere in between. Now, Love, on the other hand, is battling evil with her new adopted father, Thor. However, she seems to have a dark side, blasting Thor with purple lasers when she doesn't get what she wants. Now, what's motivating this? Is this some lasting impact from her bond with eternity, or maybe being brought back from the dead has corrupted her in some way, Pet Sematary style? Or maybe she's just doing what any young child with godlike powers would be doing, acting out, being bratty, and blowing stuff up with lasers. But it could be something more sinister, if this mirror reflection between Thanos and Gorr is as absolute as it seems to be. Thanos is cruel and evil. Gorr is a seemingly good person who made some serious mistakes after the heartbreaking loss of his daughter. If Gamora becomes good after being raised by evil, maybe Love will become evil after being raised by good. This might even put these two characters in direct conflict with each other in a future MCU project. Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy are currently the two biggest cosmic properties stories in the MCU, outside of Captain Marvel, and they've already shown a lot of overlap. Love could appear in whatever storyline we'll see next for Gamora, or Gamora could show up in Thor 5. Thanos and Gorr are so distinctly opposite from each other that it's a shame we actually never got to see them go head-to-head. Gamora versus Love might be that head-to-head conflict, and it has all sorts of story implications. If these two do come into conflict for some reason, it would probably pit their allies against each other as well, namely Star-Lord and Thor. These two have been butting heads ever since Thor first showed up on the Benatar.
Are you mocking me? Are you mocking me? Stop it, you just didn't do it again.
And Love and Thunder showed that while they seem to have developed a strong friendship, their macho space hero rivalry never went away. Good storytelling is driven by strong conflict, and if two opposites like Love and Gamora come into conflict with each other, as well as their loved ones, Thor and Star-Lord, it would make for a character-driven, epic fight between heroes that we have not seen since Civil War. And knowing the kinds of villains that exist in the MCU tells us where they would stand in this galactic conflict. Some villains might be willing to work for the greater good, like Loki and Red Skull eventually did, but others will always look out just for themselves. But what do you think? Are there any villains who don't fit into these categories? Did I get any of the villains wrong? Let me know in the comments below, or you can @ me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, be sure to subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.